Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel. Today I have for you 5 underhyped fantasy book recommendations, and I'm going to try to feature a variety of different subgenres within fantasy so that no matter what kind of fantasy you like, maybe you'll find a good recommendation from this video. And when I say underhyped, I mean underhyped in at least what's my perspective and kind of what I see online a lot of chatter about. So maybe some of these are more popular within your own circles of space online, or you see more people talk about them than I do, but these are underhyped in my own opinion from my perspective. So here are those 5 books in no particular order. The first book I have for you is City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is his first fantasy trilogy that he released prior to his latest trilogy, the Founders trilogy, and this starts off the Divine Cities trilogy. And what I love so much about City of Stairs and this trilogy in general is the unbelievably creative world building within it. So in this world we have a society that at the very beginning of time was kind of created by these different gods, and each god had their own kind of pocket of this society. So depending on what part of the world you lived in, you lived by very different rules and you lived worshiping your god. But then one day something happens where the gods disappear and kind of leave these people to fend for themselves, and they've never known a world without their gods in them. And so you're kind of following the society after this event has happened, where a lot of these formerly very great societies have now kind of collapsed, and we're in one that was formed without a god at the center of it and is actually thriving and is ending up colonizing a lot of these other societies around it. The City of Stairs in particular follows a couple main characters as they're investigating this murder that took place, and it's a murder mystery. It's got these horror elements sprinkled throughout, because if you didn't know, Robert Jackson Bennett also writes horror books. And you've got this really political setup for this world. So it kind of has all these different elements in it that I personally love within my fantasy. I love a very politically driven fantasy world. I love a murder mystery plot within that, and then exploring the horror elements is just the cherry on top. I think that this is a really underrated series. It's not one I see a whole lot of people talk about, and even though it's not an all-time favorite for me, it's still one that I would love to revisit one day, and still one where I think about these characters all the time. So I highly recommend checking this one out if it sounds interesting to you. The next book I have for you is The Wolf by Leo Carew. This is a more recent release, and it's actually now a finished trilogy. So if you do intend to pick it up, you can complete out the series. For me, The Wolf it's a little bit more historical fantasy. It really doesn't have any sort of magical elements. So if you're looking for a very fantastical read, if you're looking for great magic and sorcery and that sort of thing, this is not the one I would recommend to you. But if you like that more historical fantasy subgenre, where it almost feels like a historical fiction with some fantasy elements woven throughout, it's essentially a reimagining of our world if the Neanderthals had kind of evolved alongside humans. And what would the world look like if Neanderthals and humans were kind of at war? And what I really like about The Wolf is you're examining kind of both sides of that war. So you're seeing characters fighting on each side and why they're fighting on each side, and you kind of understand both sides. So it's a really interesting setup because you don't really have a clear hero in the story. You don't have a clear villain. And I love kind of that morally gray area of these characters that we get to explore. I will say The Wolf in particular is my least favorite of the trilogy. I do think if you enjoy The Wolf, you will end up loving the rest of the trilogy, because each book gets better and better in this series, with The Cuckoo being a favorite for me. I loved that conclusion so much. So The Wolf, it's not going to work for everyone, especially if you like your fantasy to feel much more magical. But this one is a really political and military heavy fantasy that I just thought was executed so well, and loved examining the psyches of these characters who are not necessarily right or wrong. They're in that gray area. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out The Wolf. And even if you don't love The Wolf, I would challenge you to still continue the series, because in my opinion, each book improves upon the previous one so much. The next book I have is a novella, and it is called Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. And this is one that is historical fantasy, once again, but actually takes place in our world in the 1920s, 1910s, I believe. And it's essentially following the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, but it asks the question, what if the Ku Klux Klan were actual monsters? What if they were actual, like, demons, like people possessed by these demons that had to be destroyed? So you're following this cast of characters who are these hunters of these monsters that take the form of the Ku Klux Klan, and it is so fascinating. This is one where usually I don't like novellas. I usually always feel kind of unsatisfied towards the end, where I wish we could have gotten more, or I wish we had just had more time to explore the themes or the world or whatever it may be. But for this one, I felt completely satisfied by the end. And I think it helps that you don't have a totally new world you have to set up and explore. Because it takes place in our world, we get to really focus on the themes in this one, the characters, which are outstanding. And then it's got these creepy horror elements woven throughout, where at times this was genuinely scary, like very, very creepy imagery throughout in this one. So this is one that I think is a novella that packs a punch. If you're looking for something you could read in a day or a couple days, if you're looking for something that's just a page turner with fantastic characters, really interesting themes to explore, and just cool imagery, then check this one out. I think it's probably my favorite novella I've ever read. The next one I have is a mythology retelling, and it is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichec. And this is one that follows our main character, who is a witch, but is also the wife of Loki. So if you know anything about the classic mythology surrounding Loki, he is very much the trickster god. And I didn't know anything about really the characters. I mean, what I know of Loki comes from the Marvel movies, so I don't know much. But I loved the perspective that we were in following this witch and this wife of Loki, and you're really examining like the dynamics between the two and their relationship, but also like themes of motherhood as well, because she goes on to have, we'll say, unique children. And I really loved the writing. So this kind of falls into that popular genre right now of like Greek mythology retellings, where I think that this one, it just has a gorgeous writing style. I loved our main character, and I just loved the quieter storytelling in this one, where we really got time to examine these relationships between these characters. So if you're looking for something that's action-packed, that's turn the page, I don't necessarily think this is the one for you. But if you like those quieter stories that really put more of the focus on the characters and the development within those relationships, I think that this is a fantastic one and just has the most gorgeous writing. So I know that this author is coming out with another book, I think this year, so I'm definitely planning on checking out more by this author, because I think that their writing style is stunning. And the last one I have for you is one that I know is popular within the self-published fantasy community, but I don't know if it's as hyped or as popular in like the greater fantasy community, so I wanted to call it out just in case, and that is Never Die by Rob J. Hayes. I don't see a ton of people talk about this, but again, if you're in the know in the self-published community, you probably know Never Die, but for me, I think that this one's really underhyped in the greater community, and it's a really imaginative, fun fantasy book that follows a main character who's a little boy, and he is on a mission where he is required to recruit these old legends from these old stories, these old like heroic legends, these warriors who have died, but he is tasked with bringing them back to life. And when he brings them back to life, they are inherently tied to him. They're connected to him, where if they stray too far from him or if they decide to go separate ways, they will die once again. So when he brings these heroic legends back to life, they're kind of forced to go along with him on his mission. And so you kind of have this really cool setup where you're getting to, it's almost like a video game setup where each chapter you're kind of like picking up a new character and introduced to one of these heroic legends, and each one of them is very different than the next one, and it varies on how heroic they really are, and getting to see them kind of come back to life and be faced with their own mortality and that sort of thing is really, really interesting. But it also reads, again, like a video game where it's action-packed. You get a lot of fun fight scenes that are very imaginative because each hero kind of has a special skill and a special way of fighting, and it's just a lot of fun, and I had never really read anything like it. The actual mission that the main character is on, I'll kind of keep this as spoiler free as I can and say as little as I can, because I think it's more fun discovering it when you go into this book not knowing anything. So discovering the mission that the main character's on was really interesting, and that mystery kind of kept you turning the pages as well. And then the ending of this book is quite epic. So I highly recommend this one. I had a ton of fun with it, and it's not very long. So again, it's something that you can probably get through pretty quick if you are as invested as I was. So highly recommend Never Die. So those are the 5 underhyped fantasy book recommendations that I have for you today. What is one that you think is so underhyped that deserves more love in the community? Leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.